You know the exact moment I'm talking about. You're standing at a coffee shop counter, or maybe you've just finished scanning your own items at a self-service kiosk. The transaction is basically over, right? But then, the cashier physically rotates that iPad screen towards you. It's asking you to choose between an 18, 20, or even a 25% tip, and suddenly buying a blueberry muffin feels like a minor hostage negotiation. Nobody carried anything to your table, nobody even made eye contact with you beyond ringing you up, and yet, there the prompt sits, while the cashier stands just a few feet away watching you decide. Welcome to another explainer here on the Zak Wealth Files. I'm Zak, and today we are tackling a daily frustration that is literally quietly draining your wallet. This phenomenon has been dubbed tip creep, and my goal today is to give you a very clear, completely guilt-free framework for how to handle tipping in 2026 so you can make deliberate financial choices instead of reactive ones.
First off, if you feel like tipping has completely jumped the shark lately, you are absolutely not alone. Let's look at the hard data here. According to a recent WalletHub survey, 74% of Americans now firmly believe that tipping culture has gotten completely out of control. That is basically 3 out of every 4 people looking at these checkout screens and feeling this exact same mix of confusion and frustration. Validating that frustration is step 1, but to actually navigate this, we really need to understand the mechanics of what's happening to our money behind the scenes.
To get to the bottom of this, we have to look at a pretty fascinating paradox in the recent data. Pew Research surveyed nearly 12,000 US adults, and get this, 72% say tipping is now expected in significantly more places today than it was just 5 years ago. Think about it, the oil change shops, the drive-thrus, the automated bakeries. The sheer surface area of where we are being asked to tip has just rapidly expanded.
But right alongside that massive expansion, there is a shocking collapse happening. The share of Americans who say they always tip at traditional sit-down restaurants has actually plummeted, falling from 77% back in 2019 down to just 65% in recent Bankrate data. That is actually the lowest level ever recorded since Bankrate began running this survey. So we've got this wild situation where tipping prompts are invading entirely new industries, while simultaneously customary tipping at sit-down restaurants, the one place it has been an absolute cultural standard for generations, is shrinking. To make sense of this contradiction, you need to realize that the whole concept of the tip has split. It's now 2 completely different economies moving in opposite directions. The first is what researchers call the customary tipping economy. This encompasses your full-service restaurants and increasingly food delivery. What's fascinating here is that this sector is holding remarkably stable. When we look at delivery tipping specifically, the data shows it remains incredibly strong. About 89% of customers still tip consistently on delivery orders, and the average tip sits right around 17%. And honestly, the behavioral logic here tracks perfectly. When the service is clear, physical, and highly visible, like someone actively battling traffic to bring a warm meal to your front door, people continue to tip consistently. The social contract just makes sense to our brains. Now, contrast that with the second category, the screen prompt economy. This includes your self-checkout kiosks, rapid coffee counters, pickup orders, and basically any transaction where a digital payment screen simply asks you for extra money regardless of whether any real, personalized service was actually rendered. This is where the collapse and the outrage are happening. A recent industry survey found that nearly 80% of consumers report feeling actively pressured by these digital prompts. It's a fundamental mismatch between the money being requested and the actual value being delivered. And this manufactured pressure, it has created a very real, measurable financial pullback across the board. Because consumers are feeling so fatigued by the screen prompts, they are tightening their wallets everywhere else. 35% of consumers report reducing their tips at restaurants specifically. 24% are cutting back on grocery delivery tips. And 19% are reducing tips for hotel staff, rideshare drivers, and even auto repair services. The tip creep at the self-checkout machine is literally causing collateral damage to the traditional service workers who actually rely on those tips.
So why is it so hard to just hit the no tip button and walk away? Well, it turns out there is a deep layer of behavioral psychology at play here. This isn't just you being annoyed. This is point-of-sale software designed specifically to leverage human psychology against your wallet. The first psychological tool being used against you is called anchoring. This is a highly documented behavioral economics pattern. Point-of-sale technology has subtly shifted the default suggested tip percentages upward over the last few years. Instead of the old 10 or 15%, many systems now default to 18, 20, or even 25%. When a screen presents these high default options, it establishes a psychological reference point, an anchor in your mind. Statistically, people are much more likely to select something close to that default than to go through the friction of manually entering a lower custom amount. The software is artificially bumping up your baseline.
The second, and honestly perhaps more powerful tool, is guilt tipping. The tip prompt is almost always visible to the employee standing directly in front of you, right? Researchers describe guilt tipping as leaving money not because it reflects the value of the service you received, but specifically to avoid the awkward, highly visible social discomfort of declining in front of another human being. It is absolutely crucial to realize that managing social discomfort is not the same thing as genuine generosity. It is a form of manufactured pressure.
Beyond the psychology, there's a core structural economic reality we have to talk about to fully understand this issue. And honestly, understanding this is what separates emotional tipping from informed financial decision-making. In states that allow a lower minimum wage for tipped workers, tips are not just a nice bonus. They are a legal mechanism used to meet a worker's minimum wage floor. Look at the difference here. For traditional service roles, like a waiter or a bartender, tips directly impact their take-home pay and literally bridge the gap to a living wage. But for the self-checkout staff or the quick service cashier, they are typically paid the full standard minimum wage, or even higher, regardless of whether you tip them or not. So declining a tip at a sit-down restaurant directly impacts a worker's livelihood. Skipping the tip at an automated kiosk usually doesn't. Now that we understand the data, the psychology, and the economics, how do we actually apply this to our daily lives? Here at Zak Wealth Files, we don't just talk about problems. We build systems to solve them. So here's a 5-step framework you can use this week to make deliberate choices about when to tip and when to confidently walk away. Quick disclaimer before we jump in, this explainer is for general education and is not personalized financial or legal advice. State laws regarding the tip credit and minimum wage structures vary wildly depending on where you live, so always keep your local economic environment in mind, as the specific stakes of tipping can look different from state to state.
Okay, let's get into the framework. Step 1. Just distinguish actual service from a generic checkout. Are you being waited on, or did you grab a muffin from a display case and scan it yourself? Step 2. For traditional genuine service, like a sit-down dinner, a haircut, or a delivery driver navigating traffic, the current data indicates that 15 to 20% remains the broadly expected customary range. This is where your tip genuinely supports a worker's income structure. Step 3. For screen prompts attached to minimal interaction or self-service, I want to empower you right now. Selecting no tip is entirely socially acceptable. The data shows the majority of Americans are already hitting no tip in these exact scenarios. You are not a bad person for declining to tip a machine.
Step 4. Recognize and consciously override that manufactured social pressure. When you feel that little spike of anxiety as the screen flips around, remind yourself that guilt tipping is just an emotional reaction to software design. It's not a reflection of service value. Take a breath and choose deliberately. And finally, Step 5. Run a subscription audit on your tipping. We track our Netflix and gym memberships, right? Well, screen prompt tips act like an invisible recurring subscription draining your monthly budget. Track your random coffee and kiosk tips for 30 days. You might be shocked to find you're bleeding $50 to $100 a month simply out of social awkwardness. Treat it as a real spending category in your budget.
If you remember nothing else from this explainer today, I want you to remember this single sentence. The real distinction in 2026 is genuine service versus a screen simply asking. Tipping culture hasn't completely broken down everywhere. It has just fractured into these two distinct worlds. By recognizing the difference, you protect your wealth from psychological anchoring while still supporting the traditional service workers who actually rely on the customary tipping economy. If breaking down the math and the psychology behind everyday money frustrations like this was helpful to you, that is exactly what we do here. Clarity always beats hype when it comes to managing your wealth. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next framework. But before you go, I want to hear from you down in the comments. If checkout software has spent the last 5 years quietly training us to overpay out of guilt, what simple rule are you going to use starting today to take your power back? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next explainer.